distinguishing between sounds, we might do a foreign language substitution so that they might take, say, a culturally based class or something like that, rather than expect them to learn a foreign language when we know that they will have difficulty distinguishing between the sounds of vowels or things like that. We may from time to time excuse a student from a meal plan if their allergy is so significant that we don't think that we can make reasonable accommodations for them, or if we can't ensure that the food that they eat has not been contaminated. And I'm speaking particularly about people who need a gluten-free diet. A lot of people think, oh, well, you just don't eat bread, but they don't understand that gluten is a binder in so many different sauces and so many different toppings and things like that. And just having exposure to that can be significant. So we may make some modifications there in expecting someone to purchase the meal plan or use the meal plan. So, how do students go about obtaining accommodations? And this is a question that we are asked frequently, because it's a very different process from what students experienced in high school, and we're not under the same laws, and we don't have the obligation to identify students with disabilities like they do in K through 12, and so the process can be very different. And for students coming from the K through 12 system into higher education, it's very confusing because they may not understand the differences, and they may think that the same process, the same things that happened in high school will happen here. Students are responsible to self-identify. They provide documentation of their disability or health condition, and it must show a significant impact. If we have a prescription pad from a doctor that says, Johnny has ADD, please help him, that's probably not going to be enough to give us enough information to know specifically what needs to be done. So we ask students to come in and sit down and talk with our staff and to talk about their accommodations, you know, how their disability impacts them. What accommodations have they used in the past? What accommodations worked, what didn't, and what do they think might work in the college environment? One of the things that we have seen a huge change in the last few years is that for many years when I first came to the University of South Carolina, it was pretty easy for me to guess that a student was going to have a midterm and a final and probably a paper or possibly a project. And so it was pretty easy to say, okay, extra time on a test, you may need some assistance with writing your paper, but that was it. But education today is very different. Expectations for students are very different. At the University of South Carolina, on the Columbia campus, we're doing a lot more of helping students learn to apply what they're learning in the classroom into real-world situations. We have USC Connect, which helps students make connections in the community. We also have a number of classes that offer beyond the classroom experiences where students actually take what they're learning, and they may go, not just, when I say volunteer, I don't mean they just go and sit in somebody's office and answer the phone occasionally or watch and see how other people are doing, but they may actually be involved in a research study, or they may be actually doing something in the community that relates back to the class that they are currently enrolled in, and a huge part of their grade comes from that. So if you have a student with a disability, they're going to need accommodations in that organization, in that location where they are volunteering. You need to make sure that they have physical access. Are there ramps? Are there automatic doors? They may need an interpreter. They may need a telephone that will amplify so that they can hear someone on the other side. Or there may be other types of accommodations that are appropriate. So we're finding that we need to sit down with faculty. We need to know what is going on in their classroom. We need to know what the expectations are and help them understand why students need particular accommodations. With the significant increase that we're seeing in students with mental health issues, attendance has become a really hot topic. And students want us to say, oh, you just don't have to go to class. But if a part of that class is you're expected to discuss with other people. You're doing small group work in the classroom. You're expected to participate in things that are happening there. Then we may need to work with the faculty and the student to determine what is an appropriate accommodation. If someone can't go to class, maybe they write a paper, maybe they do something in lieu of attendance. But sometimes they've got to be there. That's just a part of that fundamental part of that class. If you're a nursing student and you're working in the hospitals and that's a part of your learning, it's very difficult to learn that if you're not there at the time that it's being taught. So these are all things that need to be discussed, and there needs to be clear understanding between the faculty and our office and the student as to how they're going to handle those. What might they do in lieu of, or is there anything that can be done, and how do, who should they notify if they're going to be absent? What kind of documentation do they need to provide? There are just a lot of new things that we have to think about. We also encourage students to go and talk to their faculty themselves and to try to learn to work out some of these issues on their own so that they're not totally dependent on someone else to do all of that for them. I can tell you doing this webinar from Adobe Connect, it's interesting because there are different people that are doing different things, and all of a sudden I'll see cursors just moving on the screen and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I might get slightly distracted, I'm sorry. All right, so we talked a little bit about the law, and that the law requires us to do two things. It requires us to provide accommodations, but the law also requires us not to discriminate against students. And discrimination is prejudicial, and it's described as...
Oops. Karen? She's the host. Karen?
Use a type of question.
Karen, go back to the top of your screen and just click Connect Audio.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's all right. Sorry, where did I get disconnected?
At the beginning of discrimination.
Okay, well, we'll go back and talk a little bit about discrimination. I'm sorry. The ADA in particular talks about discrimination and how we cannot discriminate against someone just because we know they have a disability. For example, a lot of people might say, oh, someone's deaf, so they can't be a teacher. Well, that may not necessarily be true. They may have all the knowledge, skills, and ability to be an excellent teacher, and as long as they have an interpreter in the classroom, then they can perform the other functions just fine. And so we need to be careful that we don't just make assumptions about someone just because of their disability or because they may do something a different way. One of the things that when students or anyone, an employer, whoever, feels like that they have been discriminated against, they can file a complaint. And we encourage students to start with our office and to we have a complaint process in our office where I can look in, if they send something to me in writing, I can look into their situation and I can try to resolve it at the lowest level possible, or I may refer that student on to our equal opportunity program and say, you know, this is such an egregious complaint that I think would better be served going to the EO office, and here is how you get connected with them, and here's how you file a complaint with them. We're finding many students and many parents today are very knowledgeable of the law, very knowledgeable of what they can and cannot do, and a lot of students will go straight to the Office of Civil Rights. You often hear us refer to them as OCR, and they can file their complaints there. When someone goes to the Office of Civil Rights and files a complaint, the Office of Civil Rights assigns that complaint to an attorney, and they will contact the university and say, you know, we've had this complaint, we want to hear your side, and then they work to try to mediate that complaint at times, or they may come in and do an investigation. Sometimes they'll go back to the person and say, you know, we've talked to the university, we've talked to you, and we really don't think you have a complaint. Or other times they may come in and say, you know, this is so egregious and so wrong, we're not even going to remediate it. You know, here's what we expect you to do. So I see we have a question. What does significant impact mean for accommodations, and what type of medical proof do they need? Well, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of times we say this stuff so often, we just assume that everyone else knows what we mean when we're saying. When we're talking about a significant impact, there are lots and lots and lots of people who have attention deficit disorder, but it may not significantly impact them. Lots of CEOs of large companies are perfectly capable of, leading their company, making decisions, doing the things that they need to do. They have learned to compensate. Maybe they use Post-it notes all over the place, or some people may use a handheld voice recorder that they're constantly taking notes. Everybody does it a little bit differently. It only becomes significant when it prevents you from doing something that you want to do. So, for example, if someone has their ADD is so significant that they can't pay attention in class or they can't focus on a test, that's when they may need an accommodation. So a lot of times I will use diabetes as an example because it's a little bit easier, I think, to understand. You may have 5 or 6 people with diabetes, and one person is able to control their diabetes with diet, and they don't even need to take insulin. So as long as they eat properly, they get enough rest, they take care of themselves, they don't have an impact. So they might not need an accommodation at all. You may have someone else whose diabetes is fairly well managed, but it's such that they may need to take insulin. And so helping them arrange their classes so that they have a break, they can check their blood sugar, eat at regular intervals, take their medications so that they know that they have, kept things in balance. So those may be some appropriate accommodations for that person with diabetes. We have had a few students that their diabetes was what they call brittle. They just, even on medication, might go into diabetic shock in a classroom, or they might need to keep something with them. We might give them permission to eat during a class if they feel that their blood sugar is out of whack, or they start to feel weak and realize that they need to have something to eat. So it can be very different for everybody. But when we're talking significant, it's not just, oh, you have this, but it has to significantly impact your daily life, your routines on a daily basis. And what type of medical proof do they need? Well, it kind of depends on what they're looking for. If, like the student that may need to eat in the classroom, I would want the doctor to say, we are having difficulty managing their medication. If the student becomes weak or feels like they may pass out, the student may need to leave class, or the student may need to eat peanut butter and crackers in the classroom or something like that. We just want the doctor to be willing to put that into writing. There may not always be a test, and we have test results, but we're looking for significant proof, not just Karen has ADD, be nice to her. They really need to give us some examples. And it's helpful if they say, the student took for attention deficit disorder. They took the Connor scale, and the Connor scale reflects that they did this and this and this. And a lot of this will come out in conversation as we're talking to the student. Did that answer your question?
Winona? Okay. Yes, she said that answered her question.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. We need instead of having the microphone, we need, like a thumbs up or, more, I didn't answer my question or something. All right, so now we're going to move into the section that Cathie Justen was going to do, and so I'm not as familiar with the information on her slides, but I will do my best. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on?
Yes.
Can I just ask it?
Sure.
I was interested in your, on what you think about the Title IX Dear Students letters that seem to come out every year and their validity.
Can you hear her, Karen?
No, I didn't hear.
It's the Title IX Dear Students letters that come out.
She's asking about the Title IX Dear Students letter that came out.
Come out regularly.
That come out regularly.
Wow, I don't know that I have seen one of those. Tell me a little bit about what they say.
Well,
You want to come just so you're close to the speaker's area.
yeah. I learned about them from a colleague at the University of Oregon, and they very specifically address ADA issues under Title IX. There might be one, I just didn't know if you were familiar with those, and if so, what you thought about them.
Oregon is under a different, the Office of Civil Rights has divided the United States into regions, and they're under a different region from us. So I don't know if that's something that's going out, because typically Title IX does not cover disability-related issues specifically. It's more on sexual assault and violence and women and discrimination against women, I thought.
You're probably right. I just thought it was worth asking you how you saw it related.
Well, I think it's important that we get information out to students about their rights and, expectations and things like that. I know there's been some concern recently that maybe Title IX has gone too far and sort of makes the accused guilty before he or she is proven guilty. So I know there's some concern about that. I'll have to look into that and see what I can find out. But thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you.
All right, so Cathie was going to talk more about the relationship between disability services and distance learning. And I think this is just a really new field for us, or emerging field, but one that has a great deal of potential. I know many of our students, particularly students with physical disabilities or sometimes other health conditions who don't drive, getting to campus can be very, very difficult for them. And so the allure of having an online class was really great. But then I think as we got into online classes and even seeing how teaching online has changed significantly over the past few years, people thought, oh, it's really easy. You just read a couple of chapters in a textbook, take a test, you work at your own pace, and everything is hunky-dory. And I think we're finding that that's not necessarily true, and that in order to have a really interesting online course, you need, a a number of different formats. You need to present information in a number of different ways. There does need to be, you would like to see some interaction between the students that are taking the course and the teacher, and among the students in themselves. And so that's opened a whole new can of worms for us in disability services, because it frequently seems that the technology for making things accessible tends to lag behind the technology that's being used in online courses. And so we frequently end up with students who are registered for courses but cannot access the material, or at least access it without a great deal of issues and concerns on the part of the student and on the part of disability services and the faculty member. But just a couple of things to keep in mind is, as with students who are taking face-to-face courses, students with disabilities need to self-identify in order to receive accommodations. They have to provide documentation, and again, that documentation would probably need to say, the student uses a screen reader, or the student needs print enlarged, or if a student has a visual disability, maybe they can't look at a screen for very long without causing a headache or something like that. That's the type of information that we need the doctor to put in that documentation, so that we know what may cause problems for them and the types of accommodations that they may need. It's important that they meet with the staff to discuss the impact of their disability and how they're going to receive their accommodations. For example, if a student needs extra time on an online test, then we have to let the faculty member know, and they can go in, like Columbia campus, we use Blackboard. I know Midlands Technical College uses Desire to Learn. Different campuses use different things, and faculty don't necessarily know how to give that extra time, and so we may need to work together to do that. Particularly in online classes, faculty play a key role in making sure that whatever information they put online meets the accessibility guidelines. And I think it's important to say to faculty, not just you have to make it accessible, but tell them what that means. For example, the University of South Carolina, our provost has started an initiative to review all the online courses, and we adopted the Quality Matters rubric to make sure that our online courses met a consistent standard of quality. And one of the things that Quality Matters said was, you have to make your courses accessible. Well, when we sat down and started looking at it, we said, well, what does that mean? And so after talking to some students and to some faculty and to some other people in disability services, we decided that for a basic level, a minimum level of accessibility, that all the videos that are shown must be captioned, and all of the documents that are posted by the faculty member must be readable through a screen reader, so they must have gone through like optical character recognition or whatever. And I'm going to give a shout out to Brad and Dow and Susan Quinn this afternoon, because they're doing the follow-up for us this morning, and their follow-up is going to tell you specifically things that you can do to make those documents accessible, how to caption videos, and those kinds of things. So I see we have a question. Some departments have essential functions like nursing, being able to see, hear, etc. For distance learning courses, in your opinion, is it okay if those distance ed courses have a lower accessibility bar, since students in those courses must have met the essential functions criteria to be in those courses? I'm thinking of captions for videos. Actually, that's a really good question, but my answer is no. I do think that all courses must meet those accessibility guidelines for a number of reasons. First of all, you might have someone with a learning disability, but having access to those captions can be very helpful. I know the provost on the Columbia campus has a committee that was reviewing these courses to make sure that they met these accessibility guidelines. And we had a lot of discussion about these at the beginning. And when we came back to meet at the end of the year, and when we started talking about the courses and, feedback from students, and I thought this was really remarkable because it was programs that I thought would be very much opposed to making things accessible, said that they had gotten tremendous positive feedback from students who were international students who spoke English as a second language, that how much easier it was to understand the videos when they had the captions along with the audio at the same time. And sometimes the video quality is poor, or you may have a faculty member who has an accent or is difficult to understand. And so having those captions made it easier for everybody. And we were just very excited to hear them say that they saw benefit for everyone having access to those captions. I think also we have to be careful these days that we don't just assume that someone who is hearing impaired can't be a nurse. They have stethoscopes now that have LED screens. I thought this was sort of interesting. There was a college in the Midwest that a student filed an OCR complaint over something very similar. And they found these stethoscopes, and so they allowed the students who were hearing impaired to use the stethoscope, and it would show the heartbeat. It was almost like watching an EKG. And come to find out, the students with hearing thought that that was such a benefit to have that LED screen that they all went out and bought those same stethoscopes so that everybody was using the same stethoscope. So I do think there are benefits to everyone for having those things in place, and that all courses should meet that minimum level. So many students with disabilities find distance learning to be a great way to learn when they're worried about accessing campus and parking and things like that. And some people find that working at their own pace is really good. But for some students, distance learning can be a problem if they have difficulty making themselves do things, meeting deadlines. And for some of our students, that they may need that interaction with other people to keep them going. And so helping students determine which courses they should take online, which courses they should maybe take face-to-face can be really important. Having that structure and accountability can be very helpful to them. But I think one of the nice things is that we know that distance learning can make learning accessible for everybody. There are a lot of benefits to having online courses, and I think that we're just going to see the quality of teaching improve. We're going to see students being more comfortable in these courses. I think we see at the Columbia campus that most students may take 4 face-to-face classes and 1 distance learning class in a semester just because it helps them with their scheduling. Some best practices for online instruction. If you think about universal design, and I know that's another topic that we're hearing more and more people discuss and may not always be familiar with, but universal design is based on the concepts that came from universal design for buildings, that if you make the entrances accessible, then it makes it easier for everyone. Women with strollers, people who maybe are carrying a lot of heavy things, or maybe they're carrying things on a gurney or something like that, having ramps, having automatic door openers, those things made it better for everybody. And so when you're planning your course, you want to make sure that you have thought for as many people as possible, and that you can make easy adjustments when necessary. And a lot of this happens during the planning stage. One of the things that we have found is that the sooner we can notify a faculty member that they have a student who is deaf, or they have a student who is blind, or a student that has a need for accommodations, the sooner we can let faculty know, the easier it is for them to make those modifications while they're setting the course up, instead of waiting till the first day of class and saying, oh, by the way, and now they have to go back and retrofit everything. And that's what we want to kind of try to avoid if possible. Um, distance learning, one of the things that makes distance learning so good is that you utilize various modes of delivery, but it also makes it a little difficult at times if you're trying to caption a video and make sure you have text available and those kinds of things. It takes a little bit more time to do it. And some of the faculty that we worked with last year who were working on making classes accessible, the first time sometimes was a bit of a struggle, but once they figured out what they needed to do or how to do it, then the second time it was a lot easier. The third time it was even more easier. But we found that students would benefit from a variety of modes of delivery and from a variety of resources that they had that were available to them. All right, another question. Faculty often get assistance for accessibility accommodations for face-to-face courses, making a textbook braille, getting an interpreter, etc. What do you see as the balance of responsibility for distance ed classes between your office and the faculty? Do faculty get assistance from disability services making their distance ed courses accessible? The stance that we have taken right now, because we were undergoing this course review where we were doing 100 courses at the same time, was if there was a student with a disability in that course, then our office would work to make that course accessible because there was a time frame involved. We needed things done immediately, that kind of stuff. If there's not a student with a disability who is registered in that course, faculty had a lot more time in setting those courses up. They had like almost a year's notice that, you know, your course is going to be reviewed next spring and you need to do this and this and this. We have worked with faculty to teach them how to use some of the equipment. We have brainstormed with them on ways to make lectures easier to caption. For example, if you're using Adobe Connect, one of the things I found, because I teach online as well, was I don't do very good talking without an audience. And so if I typed out what I wanted to say and put it in the notes section, then that was all I said when I was recording that particular slide. Then I already had my caption available and people could read that caption while they could read the notes section while they were listening to me and viewing the slide, and that made it easier than somebody having to go back then after I had rambled on for 30 minutes and caption everything I said. So there's some things like that that we can do to help people out. I do have to give kudos to Dr. Emeritus and Dr. Ford in our provost office, because after a short time and we realized how difficult it was to provide captioning, and that it was like, do we want faculty to be content area experts or do we want them to be captioning experts? And so the provost came forward and everyone that needed captioning were able to apply for and get a $1,500 grant to help cover the cost of captioning. They could either hire someone to do that captioning for them. They could send their audio tapes. There are a number of different companies that will caption for you and send it back. Another department on campus hired graduate students to do those captioning. So each department kind of figured out what worked best for them. Some departments pooled that $1,500. Some departments left it up to each individual faculty member. And that's one of the things the committee will be doing this year, is we're going to go back and sit down and look at how much time it took, how much money it took. You know, some courses have more audio than others, and try to see if we can figure out what is the best way to make this work and make it easy for everybody. But we do try to work collegially with everyone that we can. So I hope that answered your question. Yes.
Did that answer you, Devin? Let me just plug in something here from a course development perspective.
Sure.
Because I think if I'm incorrect, just tell me. But you're speaking from the perspective of the course is already there, and you're going back to make them accessible, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say the plugin I was going to make for me as a designer when I'm working with faculty is we have this long drawn out conversation before we start developing the course about the plans for the course. And if
Uh-huh.
a faculty member tells me that they are going to do lectures or podcasts or anything like that, we have an extensive conversation about best practices on creating those lectures and audios so that you're not having to go back after the fact and provide captioning and all of that. So they know up front that they need to do scripts, they need to do whatever it is so that you're aware of the amount of time that it takes not to just develop a course, but also to make um, your lectures and podcasts accessible. And we also have a conversation about copyright because all of that goes into play when you're developing a course, and it takes time. So I just wanted to plug that in.
No, thank you. I'm glad you did, because that was probably one of the things that surprised me the most in doing this process last year, and but I find very valuable now, is that everything that you can do in the planning process makes it easier as you go along. And sometimes we had to kind of, well, is this really the best modality to do this in if it's going to be so difficult to make it accessible for everyone, or is there a better way? And I think that's key, is planning up front. It can make a huge difference.
Yes, it's time consuming, but once it's done, it's done.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that you might run into um, when you are planning a course, and once you have students enrolled in your course? Um, we on our campus have a student who is deaf and blind who is taking the master's program in library and information science, which is a program that is offered predominantly online. And so every semester, there are tons of videos that need to be captioned, but sometimes there are other things that need to be done as well to make sure, that this student can enlarge the print on some of the graphics and things, making sure that and this is some of the stuff that I know Brad and Dow will talk about this afternoon, making sure that you label charts and graphs appropriately so that the screen reader reads it in the right order and in the right way. Um, when you have a student who is blind, they may not be able to read the print. They may need things in Braille, and it takes time to set that up. For those of us who watch too much Law and Order SVU on TV, we think everybody can sit down at a computer and type, for 2 seconds and hit enter, and presto changeo, you have Braille. Well, that's not the way it works. It takes a little bit longer than that, and so that planning piece is important, and making sure that students have access to the material at the same time that everyone else does. Years ago, it was like, as an instructor, I could walk in today and say, here's a handout. Oh, you need it in Braille? Well, I've got 2 weeks to get it to you. But now the expectation is, if I hand out that handout to everybody in my class, I need to make sure that I've got it in Braille and or enlarged print if I have a student that needs it at the same time that I do it for everybody else. And the same thing with your captions on videos. If I can sit up at 2 o'clock in the morning in my jammies in front of my computer at home and watch that video, then the students who are deaf need to be able to sit at home in their jammies at 2 o'clock in the morning and watch that video at the same time. And so I think that's been a real game changer for us, but it's caused us to think more proactively, which I think is good. And again, students with disabilities, learning disabilities, somebody that may have difficulty hearing, but may not need captioning or an interpreter all the time, but the sound quality sometimes on speakers is not great. If somebody has a particular accent or something like that, may make it more difficult to hear or understand. The captioning can be valuable too. What can you do as the instructor to modify the delivery methods? I think Veronica made a very good point. Thinking about the types of assignments, giving people flexible assignments, giving them choices in their assignments, and a lot of these things can happen in the planning process that make it easier for you and for the students. All right, some more tips and strategies. On on our website, and Brad will talk about that this afternoon, we have a template for a syllabus that already has the I'm not a technology guru. That's why I hired Dow and Brad. Let me just tell you right now. But behind all of what you see on screen, there's information in the back that the computer reads, that the screen reader reads, that tells them what to do. And there are ways that you can set that up so that the screen reader reads things and reads it in the right order. And you can use, for faculty, you can use that template, and you should be good to go. There are a lot of little things like that that we can teach you that will make it easier. For some students, the electronic format is good for, like Cathie has said in the past, for students with learning disabilities as well, because they can listen to it and it speeds it up. If I'm taking a class and a student with a learning disability is taking a class at the same time, it might take me an hour to read the material. It might take that student 2.5 or 3 hours to read the same material and walk away with the same information. And so, anything we can do to make it easier for them to master that material in a timely manner is going to be very important. Oh, we've talked about reading graphics and, pictures. If you have pictures, a lot of times you'll put behind there where it will say picture 1 or picture 2. But, we use pictures to tell a story. So if your picture is telling a story, then you need to make sure that that alternative text behind the picture tells that story as well. I have a couple of friends I'm friends with on Facebook, and when some of us will post a picture, they'll put in parentheses in the comment section, "This is a picture of Karen eating yet again another cookie. Geez, she needs to stay on her diet." Or whatever information it is that you want to communicate, that's what that picture is communicating. That's what needs to be in that alt text behind the picture, so that that person understands what you're trying to communicate. You want to make sure your page layouts are clear and simple. I like a lot of white space so that my eyes can focus on, what I need to do, and I can read faster that way. And be careful about using a lot of color, because we do have students who are colorblind and they may not perceive the color, and sometimes the color just looks different on different computers. So you want to make sure that there's good contrast there as well. And I feel like we're running out of time, Veronica.
Yes, we're about there. If there's anything on Cathie's slide that you haven't covered and want to cover, we can do that if you have a moment to spare.
I think
because we don't have the next session is not until 1 o'clock. So unless the folks in the audience, if they want to bear a few moments, you guys okay here? Okay, we're okay on this end.
Okay. I think the biggest things, I've covered pretty much everything else. A couple of things to think about when procuring distance learning technologies and software. A lot of times we ask vendors, is it accessible? And they'll say, oh yes, of course we're accessible. And they don't a bit more know what that means than a man in the moon. So you really need to test it out. And if you have students or faculty or staff who are willing to test things out for you, kind of do a trial run, because we've gotten burned a couple of times where people told us, oh yes, things were accessible, and it turned out they weren't. And then that causes our office to have to go back and retrofit some things, and that can be very difficult.
I want to plug in something else too, Cathie. Karen.
Sure.
I've worked with faculty on numerous occasions where they took the PowerPoints from the publisher and they felt comfort in knowing that it came from the publisher. It should be okay, but those are the worst culprits.
Yes.
So in the 1 o'clock session, I'm pretty sure that team will show you how to know if your PowerPoints are accessible. And
I believe so.
Yeah, and so if not, you'll see what's wrong with the PowerPoints and how to fix it. But just because it came from the publisher does not mean it's in compliance.
Exactly. And if anyone were to file a complaint, you would be the one that would be responsible, not the publisher.
Right.
Here's another question. Would the optional assignments be for just the students with accommodations or all the students enrolled in the class? Wouldn't that lead to just a particular group of questions being answered? I tend to make those assignments available to everybody so that no one feels like they're being singled out. And just like we have people who have preferences for auditory learning or preferences for kinesthetic learning, it kind of gives students the chance to say, well, I'd rather create a video, or I'd rather, write a paper. I think just giving everybody those options can be really empowering for them, and less singling out the person with a disability. So I tend to do that. Sometimes you may not be able to do that, but whenever you can, that would be my recommendation. And a lot of that goes back to the planning. You have to plan those activities in such a way that whatever information you are testing or whatever information you want them to demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and abilities is reflected in all those different options for assignments. And that's all I have. Unless anybody has any other questions, please feel free to email me if something comes up later on. I know I usually get into another session and I go, oh, I wish I had asked. So I don't know that we have it on here, but I apologize for that. My email is karen@mailbox.sc.edu. And thank you all very much.